My name's Tyler Grace. I am a remodeling renovation contractor out of southern New Jersey. So being up here, this is very North Jersey to me. This entire vibe is crazy. Um, but I'm going to today. I did a presentation earlier on integrating windows into a building envelope with a WRB. I use Tyvek for that. And for this presentation, I'm going to show you how to integrate a window into an exterior wall assembly using Zip R. So I don't know how many of you are renovators, builders. I pulled up this article. Somebody sent it to me. They sent it through an associate of mine, and it's basically saying that as the code changes, we're gonna have a R20 wall assembly and then an R5 continuous exterior insulation. As we move forward with that, with producing and building more energy efficient homes, that's going to present some challenges. Companies like Zip create this Zip R sheathing, where if you come and look at this on the side, there is an inch and a half of foam in here. So then your plywood's on the outside. You can also use a traditional sheathing. You could use a rock wool type product. You can use a foam insulation. You're going to make sure that you have a drainage mat or drainage plane behind that. So companies like Zip make it very easy, but there's still certain challenges that you're going to face with that. I built this wall out of 2x4s, but if you look at it from the side, being that we have an inch and a quarter or an inch and a half plus a half inch of sheathing, I had to make up 2 inches for us to attach our window to. So they, as per their spec, their installation, they don't allow us to attach our window to the half-inch sheathing. It has to go to structure. So there's a couple ways that you can do that. The easiest way for me is to frame that window like normal and then rip down whatever bucks you have to install and install them after your framing's done. Let me find my tool belt. So I think I'm gonna keep this the way it is. So everyone can see it as I go, and then I'll install the window on this side of the display. But a couple of things to note. Again, this is all left back. This is just buck. So I ripped these 2 inches after the window is framed out. I install these, and then I cut my sheathing afterwards back from that to make sure that I have that solid assembly. One thing that we want to address is that this does not have that any sort of weather resistant barrier on it. So if there's no drainage membrane going on top of this, which some finishes you'll use, I want to take care of this first, right? So I want to close up this gap. I want to air seal this gap. You can use a fluid applied membrane. You can use tape like I did here. The easiest thing for me to use is tape. So the first thing I'm going to do everywhere is basically cover any of this exposed wood around this entire opening. So Zip does make a proprietary tape that you want to use with their system. I use the Zip tape and the Zip stretch tape a lot. Even when I'm not using Zip products, I do mostly renovation work. So typically older homes do not have a Zip system installed on it, but I will use some of their flex tape. So the first thing I want to do is I want to start at the bottom. There's a couple ways that you can look at this. You can look at this as if it's shingle-style installation, or sometimes I tell people fish scales, right? You want to work your way up from the bottom and layer everything from there. I forgot to mention, if anyone has questions, there's a lot of noise in here, but you can come tap me on the shoulder, yell at me, scream, whatever you have to. One thing that they spec is always to roll their tape. So they have a J roller that you can use, but it's a pressure sensitive adhesive, and they want to make sure that you roll that, all the tape that you put on. So I'm going to work my way down the sides, again, overlapping in that shingle style. This is a little bit more time consuming than a standard Zip install, because a standard Zip install, you don't have to have this additional layer of tape. but you do get the benefits of having an exterior insulation for energy efficiency and to deal with thermal bridging. Now, this is not something that's going to go away, so we're going to have to adopt it in some way or another. So you see I start at the bottom, work my way up to the top. And at that point, I'll have all of that wood sealed. And then I just have to roll it. So this is the J roller. You could probably make one of these if you wanted to. But I was a sucker and I bought one. So it has a little metal piece on it that leaves an indentation so they can see where you rolled it. But you're going to roll all of it. Like I said, it's pressure sensitive to make sure that you get that good seal on there. So that's taking care of air sealing between our sheathing and our window box. And again, if you come late to this, I'm going to leave this one the way it is so that you can see it. If you want to look at the framing when I'm done, I'll leave this up for a few as well. You can come see how I framed it on the back side, and you can see what the foam looks like over here. Another thing that I do, so Andersen, I'm installing Andersen Windows. They approve 2 different installation methods. So they'll approve what's called a drainage install. That's what I'm going to be doing here. And then they also approve a barrier install. The difference between them. So drainage, essentially, you're saying that water that gets onto your sheathing, onto your WRB, if it gets inside the window, if the window fails, you're leaving this bottom flange unsealed so that water can weep out. Right, so you're going to back caulk the window on all 3 sides. You're not going to silicone the bottom. You're going to tape the window after install on all 3 sides. You're not going to tape the bottom. And the reason for that, windows eventually will fail. Windows will leak, regardless of what type of window, what manufacturer. They're always going to leak. So if that water gets in, we want to create a way for that water to get out. The only time barrier install is an option now because we are building houses very tight. If you're using a drainage plane on the outside, there's less chance of water getting in. I still don't love it. The only installation I would consider a barrier install on, which again you're sealing completely and then you're taping completely, would be a casement window, more so than a double hung. And you'll see once I get a double hung up, but between the jamb liner and the way the window operates, there's just a lot of points that window can fail over the life of the window, that water's going to get in. And I like to be able to create a drainage plane that water can get back out. So in doing that, I'm installing using the drainage method, not the barrier, but I like to pitch my sills. So what I did, I use 1/2 inch cedar clapboard. I ripped this down to whatever, this is 6 inch, so keep it 6 inch. My other display was just a normal stud wall, so I have 4 inch, but this comes in 12-foot lengths. I just rip it down to whatever size I need, and then when I frame my rough opening, I frame it whatever the thickness of that is. So if it's 1/2 inch, if it's 3/8, this is 1/2 inch. So I made my RO a 1/2 inch bigger to account for putting this on the sill. I've seen people actually pitch their framing and it's a lot of work and it's not worth it to me, and then you get a weird transition where your subsill is pitched and it doesn't align with your studs that are underneath it. So this is by far the quickest way. You just have to make sure that you account for it when you frame, that you can put this on there. I already installed these at home because I knew I'd be working on a table and I didn't want to knock this entire thing over by banging on it with a hammer. But all you're going to do is put that on your sub-sill and then nail that down. I would use, for most of my installations, I'm just using roofing nails. They lay flatter. For this, I'm going to be using screws again because I don't want to knock this whole thing over, although that might be entertaining. So the next step for me, after I seal all of this, we roll this, is to get that pitch sill on, which I already did. and then we're going to actually wrap this. So there's a couple different ways that you can address sills. You can use a metal pan, which in my opinion is super durable. It requires a unique skill set. If somebody sets the window, chances are, they move it around, they don't set it properly, they're not going to cut it, they're not going to rip it. It's going to hold up, and generally speaking, it's going to be one of your better options. You can also use a flex tape, like Zip makes a flex tape. If anyone wants to see it, I have a roll up here of it. This is really a great product. It makes flashing windows super easy, but it can rip, and it's also very expensive. That's like maybe $200 for a roll of it, so it gets to be pretty expensive. So when I have to pay for this myself, and Kuiken Brothers isn't giving it to me for free, I end up running tape and then using the flex tape just in the corners, because it's very expensive. So again, it's almost like I'll show you what I do with the bow tie method, where I'm flashing across the bottom with normal zip tape, and then I would come and I would just put my flex tape in the corners. It saves you a little bit of money, but at this point, I got this for free from Kuiken, so I'm using it. I'm using it like it didn't cost me any money. All right, so I'm going to show you first on this one, before we do anything else, what I mean by a bow tie method. So before flex tape, you would use just a more traditional, whether if it was a butyl-based or a traditional flashing tape. And this is always the hardest thing to do, but I'll tell you, it's substantially harder when you have a room full of people watching you. Shouldn't have cut my nails for this. So this is the flex tape on this side. You can see I have my tape here, right? It's one piece all the way over. There's no pinholes. There's nothing to fail in that corner. So on this side here, I would do the same thing. I would cover this, and then what I do, so I don't confuse you, let's do that first. We have plenty of time. So if I were using that on this side, let's run this to here so you get a better visual. So this is what I call the bow tie method. So you're going to use just a normal flashing tape that doesn't bend or doesn't flex like the flex tape. Get this on here, cut a normal length of it, and then I'm going to fold this into that corner and then cut it. So you want at least a 2-inch overlap on the front. So I let this drape into the corner. Do not force this. The more you force this or try and manipulate this, the sloppier it's going to get. So nice and easy. I use their little fluid applied. Bondo makes these too. And then you're going to cut this in the corner. But now I have a potential area for that to leak in the corner. Right there, there's a pinhole. And if any water is going to leak, it's going to leak in that area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a bow tie. So you take whatever your flashing tape is and just cut a square of it if it's 5x5. And then fold it in half. And I marked this up here so everyone could see, but you're basically going to leave around a 1/2 inch of material in the center of it. And you're just going to cut this off of here. Again, leave that 1/2 inch or so right in the center. And that's what I'm going to use to flash that corner like that. I think I have a spare one cut of different material if anyone wants to see it. So if you're using this tape or doing this method, you don't have Kuiken Brothers money to buy flex tape, and you use this, you can make up a bunch of bow ties and save yourself a little bit of time. But that's not going to help you with peeling the backing off of it. So the flex tape all kidding aside, is expensive, but it does save you a ton of time and labor. And you don't risk having any sort of pinholes or overlap. You're not building up the tape in that corner. So it is a really good product. And if you're trying to save a little bit of money, again, you can use it just on the corners. So I peel this off, and that bow tie goes right in the corner like that. And that's how you can address sealing that corner. Right, so I use the same knife wherever I put that thing. Here. And get that tucked in that corner nice and tight. So now you don't have a ton of buildup there. You took care of that. You can also put these bow ties on beforehand and then run your tape over top of it. To me, that's somewhat of a moot point. All right, so those are the two options as far as if you're using tape and flashing your sill. The important things, again, to note is that I pre-taped the front of that. I pitched my sill. You're rolling the tape, excuse me, and then come up your sides. So I had this conversation earlier. If you had a WRB on top of this, there's people who will tape this entire side up. You can do it. To me, your issue is going to be if this window leaks, the issue's not going to be the water running down here. The issue's going to be down here where it collects and getting it back out. So it's the same thing with wrapping your Tyvek or your WRB in. Back in the day, you used to cut it, and then you'd fold the top and you'd fold the bottom in. You'd fold the sides in. I'm okay with the sides being folded in. I don't need it. The top, absolutely not. Because when water gets behind that Tyvek, which it eventually will, now it's just coming right into your house. And the bottom, I want to be able to tape to my sill. So the bottom, I don't want it there either. If you want to do it on the sides, you could do it on the sides. Again, for me, that's kind of take it or leave it. So let's get to actually working on the window that we're going to install. So the zip tape, what I do when I'm installing this, and I'm going to be standing in front of everyone, so I apologize. I'll try and move out of your way. But I fold this in half, right? So I cut it. If I want it to come 8 inches up on the wall and I measure that and it's 30 inches, I'm going to cut a piece, pre-cut it, 46 inches, and then I measure the center of this. It's 26, right? So I'm going to make a mark at 13. It doesn't have to be perfect. This tape, it stretches. So it's going to go wherever you push it. You just want to lay this down. So the best way that I found out to do this is to mark the center, fold this in half, start from the center, and just drop it into place. Starting on one side and then pulling it and stretching it creates a huge headache for me, and it's really difficult. So that's the best way that I found to do this. I need somebody just to peel these for me. All right, so folding them in half, now I know my center line on the tape. That accounts for where I'm going to run this up the walls. So now what I do to install this, it has where the backing's on there, it basically has that 2-inch overlap that you already need. So I take this at my center mark again. I just let this fall where it wants to. I'm not like, if I stretch this, it's going to go wherever I want and it's going to get a bunch of wrinkles. So I just let that fall. I'll put that there so it doesn't go into the corner yet. Man, I keep losing my little putty knife. Where'd I put it? Ah, there it is. So as this goes into the corner here, right, I want to keep it nice and straight, and I'm just going to use that to get into the corner again so that when I go to install the window, there's not any buildup there. I'm not tearing that. So that one's good. Now, if you see, I left this one because I can only do one side at a time. So instead of trying to jam that one into the corner, I just tack it up there. And then the same thing, I'll pull that and I'll just let it fall where it wants to into that corner and use this tool to get it nice and tight. So if you do it right, you really shouldn't have many wrinkles there, right? And then I'll work my way down. And then when you get to the corners, it's easier to do this from inside, but you're going to grab it with your two hands, and then you have one shot to do this. You're going to stretch that across the corner so it's tight in that corner, and then push it. So same thing over here. Push that away from that corner. So you can see no bow ties. Everything's nice and neat. And then you're going to want to roll that as well. So at this point now, once this is rolled, I'm good to start prepping for setting my window. So I mentioned before I'm doing the drainage method. So I'm not going to silicone the bottom. I also... People ask, can you use caulk? I always use 100% silicone. So regardless of what product, whatever manufacturer, make sure that it's 100% silicone. You could probably use their fluid applied for it too. It's probably an expensive option. But I'm not going to silicone down there. You guys all know why. Guys and girls know why, right? We want it to drain. So essentially, I want to put this right where this flange is going to go. So this is somewhat of a last line of defense, right? If your tape fails, if water gets in, I would not rely on this alone. I'm not really expecting this to do too much as far as water goes. A bit of a last line of defense. More so, this helps with air sealing. I never rely on caulking, whether it's interior or exterior, for waterproofing. If you're caulking something that already leaks, that's one of the worst things that you can do because you're trapping the water and it has no way to get out. Where are my windows? Over here. All right, so the other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that your window, depending on the make, the manufacturer, this one would probably be fine, but you want to shim that up off of your sill some. If your window's sitting in water and it's going to rot, it's probably going to wick the water up where these sides have the end grain. So if you can keep that off of that end grain as much as possible, the rest of it shouldn't be touching it except for right up front. So again, I want to make sure this water has a place to escape and that it's hopefully not wicking into that. I said earlier I would typically be using roofing nails for this, but I don't feel like nailing this and knocking this whole display over. So I have my shims in. Normally you'd have somebody on the inside, somebody on the outside. I'm going to set this window, and I'm going to squeeze these sides into this silicone. And you can see that's right where my screw holes are going. I'm not going to get into how to set a window here. That's not what this discussion is on. But essentially, you're going to make sure that your sill's level. At that point, you can check your sides. You can check diagonal. Get it shimmed on the inside. Make sure that everything's square. And then the last thing I do is I'll just unlock the sashes, and I'll make sure that they're operating and nothing is bound up on them before I screw them off. So if you're unsure of how to set a window, you can also read the manufacturer's spec, but start with a level sill and you'll be in decent shape. The other thing that Andersen specs on these is to put a nail in every hole in the nailing flange. I'm not going to do that right now because I would be sitting here screwing this window in for the rest of the presentation. So we're going to bypass that. I'll put a few screws in here and we'll get good to go. They actually do allow screws in their spec for installation. The nails sit much flatter and I get a better seal with the tape, and then I feel like the trim goes on better as well. So now you can see as that squeezes that nailing fin in there, it's creating a water barrier, but also it's really air sealing. The other thing that I like to mention when you're using this drainage method, right? I want any water that gets into this, and this is what I was talking about earlier. A casement, you're not going to have all of these parts exposed, right? The channel where the sashes go up and down. On this sill, all of these plastic welds, they put parts in there to join the angle. So on a casement, there's less chance of failure in there. On these windows, a lot of times I've seen that plastic fail and the water is going to get in there. So this is why I like to make sure that we can drain out of the bottom. On a casement, you're not going to run into that quite as much. So when I go to insulate the inside of this window, right, you have all your shims in. You're going to go cut your shims and you're going to insulate. I would assume that with the availability of disposable spray foam or even the reusable guns, most people probably are not spending their time chinking fiberglass insulation between the rough opening and the windows. So you're using spray foam. I don't want to install that spray foam like up against the window flange, because if I'm creating, like if I have part of this installation, I need to create a dam back here, right? This sill's pitched out. Water could potentially come down here. If I have a dam or if I spray foam the back of that window flange here, that water can't get out. So I want my dam to be at the back closest to the opening of my house. When I spray foam, or the opening or the inside of the home, when I spray foam, I don't want to fill that entire void. Like, that's air sealing. I want that to be at the back of this. I want an air gap, and I want my flange to not be blocked. So again, water that gets in, it cannot make its way into the house because there's a dam all the way around this window. You're air sealed, but it allows water to escape through the rest of the window. So something else that I've seen people, when I go to renovate, is not installing nails down here. I guess they're afraid that they're going to compromise the sill pan. You have to screw this the same as everywhere else. I have seen people use horseshoe spacers for tile underneath this flange. So they'll put a horseshoe spacer and hang it off their screw. I've seen that on stucco jobs just to make sure that they have enough of a drainage plane here. But you definitely want to screw down here or nail down here. Most of these tapes these days are self-healing, and they will seal around whatever punctures you have in there. Realistically, water that's coming down here would be coming from inside anyway. You're not going to get a ton of rain making its way into this area. All right, so we have that all screwed. We're going to start taping. Any questions so far? No questions? All right. So again, this is a proprietary flashing tape from Zip. It's pretty thin. I use a bunch of different types of tapes depending on the job. This tape is decent. A lot of the other ones are really thick. So when you have your window flange assembly, your nails, silicone behind that, and then you tape and you go to put your trim on. A lot of that buildup makes it really difficult, especially if you're not pre-assembling trim. So a thinner tape does definitely have a benefit for me. All right, so I'm going to start on the sides. Again, we are not taping the top here at all. Or sorry, the bottom here at all. That's another common mistake that I'll see. They'll do everything right and then they'll tape that bottom, which is going to create the issues that we just discussed. So there, if you were at my previous presentation, I apologize if you already heard about this, but Andersen, I don't know exactly what series it is, but they make like this flange is a separate piece and then it clips into a track and it has a little rubber gasket. So this could potentially fail right here. One of their lines, it's crazy. We went to their plant and watched this, but they basically take what this like vinyl exterior and the nailing flange all is one, and they have a mold that's made out of metal, and they take steam and they heat this sheet of vinyl up, and then they take this mold and they raise it up from underneath, and then they immediately cool it with water, and that forms the nailing flange and this entire outside trim piece, so it's all one. So there's no joinery, there's no nailing flange to fail. So all of this is completely waterproof. On this could be a point where this window fails, right? That's just rubber on that side. So that being said, when I go to tape onto this, I do my best to roll this tape slightly over that corner. So if it's a 1/4 inch or so, right, I try and roll that into the corner just to cover that. If you mess up and you can't get it, you can even take your caulk gun and hit that with some silicone. It's just an extra preventative if at some point that develops a crack, seasonal movement, you get some shrinking in there. But I'll try and roll that onto the side of the window some. It doesn't have to be a lot, and you want that corner to be pretty crisp. But that other Andersen detail is actually really nice because everything's one piece. There's no plastic welds to fail. Same thing here. Roll this onto the side. So everything that I do with windows, with doors, I like to take as much of a belt and suspenders approach as possible. Doesn't take that much longer. Again, if I don't feel like that, cover that seam up, I could take my caulk gun with silicone. I could run it down the side of that and then clean that out. You just don't want any of that silicone on what will be exposed. So if jade channel or trim, you don't want that exposed because then it'll end up getting really dirty with pollen and weather over the years. All right, so we have the two sides done. And the last section is the top. And then you're going to want to roll all of this out again. Roll everything. Again, it's a pressure sensitive adhesive. So you want to make sure that you activate that adhesive. We don't have any sort of WRB on here. So this is our last line of, well, this is our primary line of defense against water, right? Typically, if you had a Tyvek going on top of this, you would then fold that tie back down and it would serve as a counter flashing. We do not have that with the zip system, so you want to make sure that this is sealed really well here. So the next thing I'm going to show you is if you went to install trim. So somebody asked me this earlier. If I were installing J channel on this application, would I put a secondary Z flashing up here? And I don't think it's necessary. On a single window like this, the water coming out here, whether I put a Z flashing on here or not, it's not going to make a deal. It's still going to run where it's going to run. If this were a mold unit, I would consider it, right? If it were field mold or if it were factory mold, because when they come together, they have a small piece of adhered on flashing that could fail. And I've seen a lot of windows where that fails. It ends up getting behind the frame. So sometimes on mold units, it's a good idea to put a Z flashing on there. The other place that I would install a rigid flashing would be once you trim this, right? So if this were our trim, one thing when you do your trim, and this is a mistake that I see a lot, whether it's trim, whether it's J channel, you do not want that trim to be tight to your window. You want to leave a gap in there, and it's for the same reason that we've discussed over and over and over again, is that I want to leave a place for that water to get out. So if I take this piece of trim and I jam that up against our window here, or even worse, I caulk that, there's no way for that water to get out. So a lot of times I'll see people who will run their J channel around here, or they'll install ASIC around here, and then they caulk the side of this. They caulk the bottom of this and the top of that, which like looks nice for a minute, but it's always going to crack. The PVC moves so much, and then any residue from that ends up getting pollen on it, dirt on it, rain on it. It just looks nasty, and it's also creating so many issues when this starts to leak. If water gets behind this, it's now trapped inside of there. So I never caulk J channel to the window. I never caulk any sort of trim to the window. To me, that's just not a good idea. So this trim, assume this trim's going around the entire window. I left a gap here. And then you're going to put your Z flashing on top of that. I'd normally be using roofing nails again here. Your Z flashing should have a pitched bend to it. Again, not a 90-degree bend. You want that water to be coming off. So now that I have this Z flashing on, that's going to kick out a lot of the water that hits the top of that. So if you don't have a Z flashing and you put a substantial trim on the top of that, and rain comes and there's no kick out flashing or no Z flashing here, that water is just going to go behind the trim. So we want to get that water out in front of the trim so it's not getting into these nail holes. Now that we installed that, though, we have another point of water, an area where water can come in, right? So now the water can just come behind there. So we need to counter flash that with tape again. So when your siding guys come in, the windows are set, the framer's set the window, everything's taped off, and they go to install this, they need to make sure if you're using zip that they retape this, because it's not like Tyvek. Even with Tyvek, I would fold that Tyvek up, I would tape this to the sheathing, and then I would fold the Tyvek back down and skip tape it. With this, your only line of defense against water is this tape up here. So you want to make sure that your guys know that that also needs to be taped. So I'm taping over my nail heads, my screw holes. And that's my counter flashing on top of that window and that trim. And then same thing as before, you're going to want to roll that out and activate that adhesive. So now when you look at this assembly, I like to, if I when I seal the outside of a house, when I address the envelope of the house, I had this conversation earlier where I like to approach it as if there's never going to be siding on the house. And I do the same thing when we renovate bathroom spaces. I'm not relying on tile for waterproofing. So I told this story earlier. I did my daughter's bathrooms. They're 11 and 8. And I was in the middle of it and I got tired of doing it and I didn't have time or energy to finish it. So I left it untiled, like 3 feet, 2 feet above the tub for about a year. And I told my wife that I was running a waterproofing experiment to see if like the way that I installed it would hold up. When in actuality, I knew it wasn't going to leak. I just didn't want to finish the bathroom or have time to. But in a bathroom, the tile should not serve as waterproofing. The grout should not serve as waterproofing. You shouldn't be relying on caulk as waterproofing. That's all finish. And it's the same thing for the outside of a house, whether you have bucks on it with the insulated zip, whether it's a standard installation, whether you have Tyvek installed. I want to make sure that even if that trim's not on the top and that flashing's not on the top, that if I weren't going to install siding on this house for 6 months, for a year, obviously there would be UV damage from the sun, but I wouldn't have leaks. I wouldn't have leaks saying, oh, the siding is going to take care of that. Once I caulk that, once I put this flashing, it's waterproof, where I could take a hose and I could flood the outside of this house and we're not going to have water coming inside the house. If by some chance I get a leak in the roof, if there's a leak from a skylight, if there's a leak from a window above that we didn't touch and it wakes its way into the wall, I've accounted for that now through my back damming, through how I've done the insulation, and by leaving this drainage open to get that water back out and in front of the wall assembly so it's not staying in the house. So I've covered my ass on our install, and I've also covered my ass if something fails above it, or fails something that came before it. So that's the approach that I like to take with the outside of the house. A lot of it's belt and suspenders. The zip without the bucks is a little bit easier because you're not putting 2 layers of tape, so it goes much faster. You can also use a fluid applied. This winds up being a little bit more work, but as the code changes, it looks like that's the direction we're going to take. You can use a rigid foam. You can use Rockwool makes products that you can get exterior insulation. With a lot of those products, you're going to need either furring behind them or a secondary drainage plane behind them because they're serving as your waterproofing on the outside, and then your sheathing's behind that. So you need a way for all of that water to escape. The nice thing about this system is the WRB's on the outside, the foam's on the inside. So you don't necessarily need that drainage plane depending on what exterior finish goes on here. But you need to make sure that you waterproof these bucks and air seal these bucks prior to whatever finish is going on the outside. I think that's it for me. Yeah, I appreciate all your time.